All right, great. Well, Dean, thanks again. You provided some really good framing comments, and I think that's a great time to have the rest of you come up and join and maybe expand on that a little bit. So these individuals here to my left and right are so well known that they hardly need to be introduced at all to most of you in this room, but we're going to do it anyway. Brian Bedford has more than 30 years of experience in the airline industry. He's been the CEO of Republic Airways since 1999, growing the regional from a fleet of 36 turboprops generating 85 million annually to a 200+ E-jet fleet generating more than 1.3 billion annually. Brian has a long tenure of service on the RAA board, serving as chair twice, and has been generous with his time and expertise with our team, and he's played an outsized role in our advocacy. So thank you, Brian.
Welcome.
Tim Combrick, to Brian's left, CEO of Empire Airlines, a regional cargo airline. Tim has been actively involved in aviation since 1971. He's logged over 13,000 hours as an airline pilot, check airman, and instructor. He's an ATP with type ratings in several aircraft. Under Tim's leadership, Empire has become the largest regional operator of FedEx and has added aerospace and unmanned divisions. Tim's been a steady force on RAA's executive committee and he's our treasurer. Chip Childs was named CEO and nominated to SkyWest board in January 2016 and has served as president of the airline since 2014. Chip has led SkyWest through tremendous evolution and growth, and under his leadership, SkyWest was named one of Fortune's most admired companies. We admire Chip as well, and not just because he's our vice chair. Please join me in welcoming all of our panelists. Okay, so we've been through crises before, but none like this pandemic. And I'm not sure if we have banned the word unprecedented or not, but it really is the only word for exactly what happened to the industry. So I asked Dean a similar question, are we back to normal yet? But for each of you, take us through how you managed, you and your teams worked your way through the pandemic up until now and the recovery that we saw in the summer. Are we back to normal, and do we even know what normal looks like now? Chip, I'm going to start with you.
You're looking at me.
Yeah.
So look, we don't exactly, I wouldn't say we know exactly what the new normal is. I think we're learning, the entire world is learning about the new dynamics of coming out of a pandemic. Sometimes I think we got it figured out. We were excited to have a very busy travel summer. But we learned that from our perspective, it was more difficult for us to get back to work and others that we relied upon to get back to work. And we still think that may be the case even throughout 2022. So I think there's no handbook or textbook for coming out of a pandemic, but we're all learning it. And I think from our perspective, what happened through it, we would do a lot of things differently, but we're just extraordinarily grateful and proud for how our people have collaborated. I think a lot of us in our companies collaborated together with our people, but I was amazed at what our people were willing to do. And this is a big evolutionary event. I think all of us up here today make a lot of decisions every single day that can dictate the future of what's going to happen. And again, there's no textbook for this stuff. We just have to pay close attention to a lot of things.
And how about you?
Well, I agree with what Chip said. There wasn't a playbook, so we were all inventing it as we went on, and things were changing rapidly. Recommendations were changing rapidly, and I, as Chip was very proud of how quickly my team responded. We went obviously remote in the office as quickly as we could. We have a tremendous IT department that set us up quickly. We'd already been doing set up some systems to where key systems could operate from home if something happened in the office, such as dispatch and flight following and so on and so forth. So we went down to very limited occupancy. It was very lonely in there. It was quite peaceful. I was there most of the time. So people adapted to it very well. But we had a lot of people, and still do, that really, they want to be in the office. So we were starting to bring more and more people back. And then when the Delta variant hit and the cases started going up, we had to loosen the footprint or reduce the footprint in the office again. And it took some doing to get people to go back. I relied heavily on the department managers to do their part, make sure they were managing their people. And it's worked out surprisingly well. I think, Ian, you talked earlier about the psychological and the social aspect and the what I call the hallway talk and stuff that you're missing. Zoom meetings to me are very sterile. They're, okay, you speak, okay, you speak, and it's hard to have a discussion, but we're adapting and we'll do what it takes. But I think we're looking forward to being more toward normal. I don't know if we'll ever 100% return to back into the office. We've learned that we can have some flexibility, and it's probably improving the quality of life for some of our employees.
If I could, I jump on Tim's comment. I think we're already showing signs of rapid adaptation. I mean, I think back to the early days when the pandemic first showed itself, at least in our organization, it did in a very sinister way. It hit us in our operations control center. And in a span of about 6 days, we had close to 50% of our folks out, and on the dispatch desk in particular. And it really got to a point where we weren't certain that we could actually manage the flight and get all the flights up in the air. And so, we obviously went into a reduction mode, canceling flights, only to find that we had too many crew schedulers out to do the repair. And so it was, in the early days, literally about a 50-day irregular operation every single day. And to Chip's point, immensely grateful for the folks who dedicated themselves to coming in every day and working like that. And it literally was like working in a winter storm every single day at work, which is not very rewarding. But since then, we've made major adaptations and adopted new practices. We took that downtime that followed once we stabilized to essentially reauthor a lot of the manuals that we operate with today. During our growth regime, we were adding blue pages, as we call them, left and right, and manuals got more and more difficult to go navigate. So we took the opportunity to reauthor an 800+ page, GMM, and do it in a way that is going to serve us for decades to come, and doubling down on the training and development that we've had. So, now we're in this work from home, and we're going to do the same with training materials and onboarding folks who aren't going to be spending the vast majority of their time at a desk.
Brian, what's been your experience?
Well, while there's not a playbook for a pandemic, there are certain roadmaps we thought were going to be helpful for us. Very early in the pandemic, we came up with some guiding principles that we wanted all of our employees to engage with in terms of their day-to-day decision making. First, we wanted to focus on the protection of our employees and our passengers. Just want to make sure that we were not just following best practices, but sort of leaning into workplace safety and passenger safety on board our aircraft. Secondly, we wanted to make sure we were operating with maximum collaboration and transparency with labor unions. We wanted them to be part of the process, part of that decision-making process. And we probably put together, I'd say no less than a dozen, short-term labor deals managing through the pandemic. So the transparency and the collaboration were real key. And then finally, and most importantly, it was focus on the future. Pandemic is going to be a transitory event. Whether that's a year or 2 years, we don't know, but let's not sacrifice all the investments we made, especially in our workforce development and in our people. So we knew from the outset we didn't want to furlough. We knew we didn't want to encourage retirements. We didn't want to lose the investment that we made in our people. So we fought very hard to protect that. And I think that's where RAA was so helpful for us. As we're working through the PSP processes, there's a natural tension between our partners and ourselves about, who's going to be the best trustee of the cash. Early on in the PSP negotiations, there was this, well, don't worry about regionals, we'll take care of them. Right? Well, of course, we're worried about ourselves. So RAA was very, very effective in making sure that the allocation of the resources was done in a fair and balanced way. And that gave us the ability to be very agile through the pandemic.
Well, that's a good point. And I think we're going to hear a lot from some lawmakers that'll be here for the next couple of days, but you all are talking with them regularly. And that really was what Brian brought up, was a key issue that we had to educate people, I think, sometimes in the middle of the night when these deals were being made on exactly how regionals are different. So with all of the noise that's going on, I mean, do you think we've been effective? Do you think people have a better sense now of what regional airlines are than they did maybe even before the pandemic?
Well, I think actually the investment that we've made over the last decade enabled us to have a seat at the table. So I don't think that, I think you almost have it backward. It was because of all the hard work to communicate how vital this segment of the industry is to network transportation in general. You know, it gave us the gravitas that we needed to be effective with the PSP negotiations.
I think the other thing is, I think we got to give some credit to you, Faye, and the RAA, because what we were doing through the pandemic as CEOs and trying to evolve and find a new normal, I think the RAA stepped up in an absolutely major way to help us out. I've been doing this for a long time and been working for the RAA for quite some time, but I can't remember a time in the conversations that we've had, you know, a year ago and all that stuff when we were trying to work through this as an industry. And I think the RAA's has really proven what the capacities that we have as an industry, and you guys have really represented as well. That having been said, I think that the other piece about being recognized, you know, from a regional perspective, the post-pandemic economy is going to be very tied to the small communities that we're seeing are going to continue to grow. Out in the West, there's a massive exodus out of California. It's going into all, you know, small to mid-sized cities, and all of this new market scenario post-pandemic where people want to live and work is going to completely change the dynamics of what regionals can do going forward. So you have to set that as a very high, you know, level of picture, is that the world's going to realize real quickly what the importance of regional airlines are going to be more and more. It's not going to go the other way. I mean, a lot of time you talk about scope and all this other kind of stuff. It's not going backwards. It's going to, the demand for regional aircraft is going to continue to increase.
I would agree with that. Tim, we know the cargo side experienced the pandemic a little bit differently. That's not to say that you weren't with it without your own challenges. So how about that? I mean, do you think that we've, you know, have we been effective? And I know that you also work with RAA in showing the importance of regional cargo carriers and some of those just-in-time packages that are not just your Amazon package, but actually, you know, sometimes medicine. Tell us a little bit about how that is important and to the smaller communities.
Sure. First of all, being a cargo carrier during the pandemic was a great place to be, and still is. And I noticed it
Was
a great
place
to be?
I noticed some of my other regional friends are starting to edge their way into it. So good for you. It's there's and yes, I am part of RAA, Regional Air Cargo Carriers Association. There's about 800 airplanes, smaller airplanes, from what I call large turboprops all the way down to small Cessnas that are operating every day and night in the US, providing last mile service, so to speak, for the integrators, for FedEx, UPS, DHL. And they're very vital part of the system. And you're right, Faye, they're the ones that get your blood there, they get the medical tests there, they serve the small communities, they serve commerce, overnight things that are important that people are willing to pay a premium to get it there. And we were proud to be a big part of the distribution of the vaccines. We are speaking on the FedEx side, and I know what happened with UPS is there's a lot of effort that went in to run a lot of special flights, carrying the vaccine, special handling procedures, and so on and so forth. And I know some of that stuff went on the regionals too, that you guys carried it, and it was a kind of a proud effort. And it made our folks feel pretty good to be part of that initial surge. But without the regional cargo carriers, this whole concept of overnight and e-commerce would look totally different. And it's a segment that is growing. The demand out there right now on e-commerce is greater than ever. Again, speaking on the FedEx side, we normally have our peak season in October, November, and December. It has not gone away. We're operating at above peak peak loads. Lift is hard to come by. A lot of the infrastructure, human infrastructure is kind of broken. So the industry is starting to see the strain of a huge demand and a lacking workforce. And if you looked at FedEx's corporate release from their earnings, Fred Smith was very frank about how the labor shortage is impacting the industry, and they've never seen anything quite like it. I'd highly recommend that you do your Christmas shopping today. Probably would be a good day if you want to get it there by Christmas.
It's a good warning for all of us.
Yeah.
So last week, the White House finally announced that it was moving towards lifting most travel restrictions for the international traffic and replacing those with vaccination requirements with certain exemptions. But with that roadmap now in sight, how do we see the international gateways changing, and what impact do we think that will have on the regional feed for those gateways? I'm going to start with you, Brian.
Well, I think first of all, getting the globe open again is going to be great for whatever what the new normal is and how quickly we can get there. I do think that it's a two-step process, though. You've got to not only open up the opportunity to travel internationally, but when you get there, there have to be things that are open for people to go do. So I think every time we see a surge, it's another pause, right? Is there a surge in Italy? Is there a surge in Spain? So those things I think continue to throw curveballs for the network planners. It's really, really hard to decide, okay, let's go dedicate some 787s to international and then have something unexpected happen and have to pause again. So I do think there's a level of caution that's certainly understandable and sensible in terms of even if the gateways, quote, reopen, will service naturally follow as quickly. I'm not that optimistic that it will. I know there's certainly a great desire to want to put airplanes back in the sky. And when that happens, we'll need to feed them for sure. But right now, what we're seeing is, the regionals have been extremely agile with our network partners in responding to where is the traffic. And if there's only, half the traffic that was there last year, we'll fly in a 76-seat regional jet versus a 150-seat narrow body. It's a good economic trade-off. We're doing a lot more point-to-point service today, because the hubs aren't open. Newark is a great example of this. So again, the industry is very responsive to, provide service to where the passenger demand is.
What's your perspective on that, Chip?
I couldn't say anything more really than what Brian has said to that. I just think it's, again, we got to get the world open back up. I think that, when you look at the overall industry, how it affects us, we fly a little bit to Canada, we fly a little bit to Mexico, and that flying to Canada is different than flying to Mexico now. And we have to schedule that differently, and we have to have a conversation with our partners about how that whole thing, works. So we're always going to be, tied up a little bit with the mandates and all that stuff because it's so pocketed and not, consistent. But the fact that our partners, we're healthy when our partners are healthy, and that's the reality of it. And if we can get international travel back and get them healthy, then that gives us a lot more opportunities and flexibility to do some things ourselves. So.
Mm-hmm. So you've all talked a little bit, Dean talked earlier about the way you plan with your partners has changed. Dean, I guess, do you think that'll be long lasting? Is this how you'll plan, and where flexibility rules the day? I remember early in the pandemic where we weren't just meeting, day of week and time of day, but there might have been one flight in the morning and then one flight, in the very late evening. And of course, that flexibility comes at a cost, whether it's labor or your fleet, ferrying fleet, and so on. But how many of those changes do you think will be long lasting?
Well, I certainly hope that what we've seen in the last couple of months isn't the future. I think there's definitely the necessity here that we, as Brian said, remain nimble and we move. we're seeing just wholesale changes and redeployments, right? And hub reassignment and those kind of things done well take time and preparation. And fortunately for us in the past, we haven't had to go through a lot because it is uneconomic to both the operator and the carrier to change seats as often as we have been recently. But we're doing it now by virtue of chasing the demand that is buoyant domestically. I do think, though, that we have built some muscle, so to speak, with being able to move a little bit faster. Again, there's tight labor markets that are principally the constraint that we all face. But in terms of resourcing the other requirements to go do a new schedule 100 days from now, we're a year and a half into it, and we're getting fairly good at it. Again, I certainly hope that's not taken advantage of, but where we can, sort of serve where we're asked to go fly and to do it faster, and it's in the interest of ourselves and the network carriers to do so.
Has that been your perspective as well, Chip?
Yeah, I think, while there was a pretty good playbook about that before the pandemic, I think we've refined it significantly since the pandemic. And I think the communication level and planning and transparency. I mean, I think, everyone's worried that, you're going to disclose that you're short on staffing or any of that kind of stuff. And I think we've broken through all those barriers, and you got to just be transparent and honest about it, because, when yields come back, when international travel comes back and performance is going to be at a paramount, you have to plan it significantly better than we did even before the pandemic. So that's a good evolution in our eyes to see that take place.
Brian, same for you?
Well, planning today is certainly, how do I say this artfully? We have benevolent dictators in terms of how they want us to move product around, and it's by day of week, it's by time of day. A lot of point-to-point flying now. I don't think it's something that we can perpetuate long term. I don't think that it is sustainable to agree to do a lot of the things that we have been doing over the long term. We will have to figure out what the new normal is and get to it. I think one of the challenges that we continue to have is, get to Delta or Gamma or Mu or whatever the latest variant is workforce resiliency. I really applaud our flight attendants. They are amazing individuals. I love to fly on our airline. Unfortunately, we're very East Coast driven, so I get to come here on Republic airplanes, and it's just amazing how well they're standing up, in the face of passenger discontent. I don't know what people are so damn angry about, but in any event, they really put up with a lot of stuff, and they continue to come to work, thank God. So, but that's a challenge. It's just, how do they get up in the morning and decide I want to actually come to work today?
And how about on the cargo side, Tim?
Well, I think that our ability to see where we're potentially going is a bit more stable. I think that I agree with Brian on a note. I ride around commercially a lot. I'm glad to be back traveling, and I have great admiration for the flight attendants and the flight crews. And I personally see some of the BS, for lack of a better word, that people just have really bad attitudes right now. But in our workforce, our pilots out there in the midst of the pandemic, the idea of masking up when you're flying an airplane with just boxes behind you took, some doing, ensuring that the protocols on the ramps between our customer and our pilots and mechanics was in place. We learned a lot through those times, and I think it's worked pretty well. I think that again, the ability to kind of forecast our future and understand where the planning needs to be is probably a little bit more stable. It's not as connected to international flying opening up, or I too have a benevolent dictator as a boss, but it works out pretty well.
I thought I was the benevolent dictator. I'm going to get my new business cards drawn up with that. Well, look, Brian, you mentioned it, so did you, Tim. But on the subject of disruptive passengers, we've been very active at the board level, surfacing these issues. And at the association level, we've been working with our counterparts, and we brought this to the FAA and TSA. And to their credit, they've been very responsive, and they've stepped up some enforcement programs. And nonetheless, the report from the field is sometimes there's no one to greet the passenger and make the arrest. And it's my view that the process of enforcement is underdeveloped. So what do you think are some of the solutions to that problem? You raised the issues that the flight attendants are dealing with this. Is the enforcement enough?
Well, I think the disconnect here is between the federal agencies and then the local airport authorities that have local law enforcement that are somehow not completely aligned with us in terms of how serious to treat passenger disruption. And so it's very disheartening to flight crews when they've had an in-flight disruptive passenger that, I mean, it's threatening. You're in a aluminum tube, flying 600 miles an hour, 35,000 feet, and someone's going crazy. You expect when you get on the ground that person is going to be treated as the threat that they were, and local law enforcement comes on and they let them go. That's very disheartening to flight crews who take this very seriously. So there's some alignment process or strengthening of the law enforcement on that. You called it the last mile, but I mean, somehow we've got to get the local folks aligned with the federal criminality of what's going on.
No, I agree with you 100%, Brian. I think, Faye, you and I talked about this earlier. We've all had that experience. We've been out in a bar or restaurant or something, there's a disruption, there's somebody who behaves in an unruly way. And if the law enforcement arrives, you have sort of this, civil duty where people will say, here's what happened. This person did this or that. And without fail, that person's going to jail. However you do it on an airplane, you lose that sort of, that opportunity for folks to come together and collectively state what the threat was and convince law enforcement to take action. And to your point, Brian, far too often, people who created a huge disturbance and a flight safety risk are let go. And that's incredibly defeating for our safety stewards aboard our aircraft, or in particular our flight attendants who have to deal with that and face that on an all too frequent basis. So we need to see more in the way of enforcement. It is a serious issue, and then one that we can't wait for a crisis to develop and occur, a tragedy, before we enact and move forward. That behavior needs to become stigmatized, quite frankly. You think what this country has done with DUI and the positive consequence of enforcement, very strict enforcement with fines and imprisonment. And this country's made great inroads in reducing that type of behavior. We need to see the same thing happen aboard our aircraft. And, look forward to seeing more enforcement and more fines levied.
Yeah, I was watching the hearing last week, and Sarah Nelson, the president of the AFA, the Association of Flight Attendants, said, when we see that arrests are being made, people are going to sober up real fast. And I think that's true. So on the topic of workforce, and we do have a panel on this later about diversity and bringing more people into the pipeline. But one of the issues that I think we can't afford to take our attention away from is making sure pilots are trained the right way. And we've been pretty effective in explaining the pilot supply issue, but there are still a lot of lawmakers out there that think the first officer qualifications rule added 1,500 hours of training. So with that said, what kind of progress do you think we've made, and what else do we need to do to show that it's not just about bringing more pilots in, but making sure they're proficient and well trained and ready to serve in our flight decks? Brian, I'm going to start with you.
Why me?
Well, because you just had your first class from LIP, right? Graduated and they're flying.
They are. I hate to be the wet blanket here. I don't think we've made very much progress at all convincing Congress that the 1,500-hour rule isn't what they think it is. And just for the folks in our audience, you guys probably know that it takes somewhere between 250 and maybe 300 if you're a little on the slow side, flight hours to get through your multi-engine instrument, even CFI and MEI ratings.
Right.
You know, and at that point, historically, and everywhere else in the world, by the way, you can leave your flight training with your credentials and you can go into carrier-oriented training, you know, whether that's with the FedEx or with the Republic or, you know, with British Airways. And this is what happens at Air Canada. This is what happens at Air Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. But in the US, we changed that to say you have to now have 1,500 hours of flight experience. Well, so that gap between 300 hours and 1,500 hours, every individual is on their own to finance that and to acquire that time. And most of that time, unfortunately, happens flying, you know, VFR, you know, Skyhawks, you know, in the pattern over the course of, you know, 18 to 24 months. It's very, again, very, very difficult, very expensive. And frankly, the training that the young men and women have when they exit flight school is now atrophied by flying pattern work, you know, non-controlled airspace and VFR flying conditions. So it's absolutely self-defeating in terms of producing high quality, you know, and proficient airmen and women. So that being said, you know, we have to work within the guidance that the law gives us. Unfortunately, we continue to advocate for alternate pathways, which the FAA has, you know, clearly the authority under the law to implement. And we think alternate pathways could take that 300-hour proficient human and then give them maybe another 300 hours of highly structured training. Would that be an acceptable alternate pathway? We haven't found the leadership, both congressionally or even within the regulatory authorities, to make that happen. Yet that continues to be the focus for us.
Everyone in aviation is concerned about pilot supply, and you know, they are not the only, of course, career group that is in short supply. Now, another problem that's not so easy to fix is the shortage of maintenance technicians. And this shortage is not just felt by the airlines, but also by the OEMs and the MROs and lots of others in the RAA family. So forecasts by the US government and Boeing are showing that, you know, those retirements are coming up. 30% of the workforce is poised to retire, and something like 2% is coming in. Is this the next crisis? And are there steps that we can be taking to bring more maintenance technicians into the pipeline? Tim, I'm gonna start with you.
Well, yeah, it's a real issue, as we all know. It affects us all, and it's, in my mind, it's getting worse. And I think COVID is, as other things, has made it even more of an urgent issue that we have to deal with. You know, we used to get a mix of people. We had great success at Empire, especially in our MRO of attracting veterans come out of the military. We'd help them get their license, their experience. They got great leadership skills. In fact, in Empire Aerospace, about 50% of our employees are veterans. And that's helped us an awful lot, but that's not enough employees. The issue I spend much time thinking about and talking to people about is how you get young people to choose it as a profession. And there's many, many things that keep them from doing that. Everything from, you know, perception of their parents saying they got to have a 4-year degree, you know, trade's not good enough, to people not wanting to do anything other than work with computers. There's quite a bit of our capacity, I understand, that's going through our A&P schools that is getting sucked off by other industries. Otis Elevators hires all kinds of A&Ps, and I know they're like an airplane, they go up and down, but I mean, they love those people. They're technically trained. The wind farm, windmills, power generating is taking a lot of those people. I don't think I have the answer. I know I don't have the answer of what we can do. I think in many ways, mechanics tend not to be as portable as pilots. They tend to want to live in an area, and I think a lot of it is a local problem. We spend a lot of time encouraging young people in junior high and high school that aviation careers, including maintenance and dispatchers and all of those things, is a very, very good job. We have local high schools that are starting to do more promoting of these various trades. But we've got a long ways to go. And it's not a money issue. It doesn't cost what it costs to go become a pilot and get all your hours, obviously. And if you're, it's just, I hear the same thing from my friends that own machine shops and welding shops and everything else. You just very difficult time getting young people to want to go into the trades. But I hope somebody else here has the answer. Chip looks like he has the answer.
I think, I mean, another thing I'd bring up is I think like the number one group that's preventing or causing operational issues today is not pilots and mechanics. It's other administrative and ground positions. Honestly, I mean, I think today ground positions are the one that's causing the most planning issues relative to our major partners. Then you've got some other administrative stuff. I can tell you from our perspective, look, we're nervous about what's happening with mechanics and A&P schools and that type of stuff. Our strategy is very simple: get early, be relentlessly aggressive, and we're starting to have to evolve and find out where there are pockets of A&Ps, and we'll put a maintenance base there, and we'll make our partners fly us there, and then make it, benevolent dictators like we talked about. But at the end of the day, we have to evolve all those issues, and we're all going to fight for the same supply. But again, we have to go back and talk about, like we did when we could not fix the 1,500-hour rules. It's a great profession, and this is also a great profession. But I think we need to recognize post-pandemically that it is almost every single work group that is. We're now struggling with everybody. It's not just one or two pockets. It's everybody. And today it's ground operations, and we do a bit of ground work and around airports and that type of stuff. And we've had to make some very aggressive pay changes almost everywhere to make sure that we can keep and retain talent. And that's, I hate to say it, but it's just economics. It ends up, coming down to that unless you can, find other ways.
Chip, go ahead,
I was just going to say, I think there are two good strategies here. One is, you said it, go local early, right? Get into junior high schools. By the time kids are seniors in high school, we've lost them. We can't influence their career decisions. Guidance counselors have already done that. So getting into, we run a number of, we own our own academy, Lift Academy, and we've got those folks, bringing mobile labs out into junior high schools, and doing that locally is certainly helpful. I do think technicians are more likely to have roots in the local community, and so partnering with them very early on has been a very successful strategy for us. The second thing, of course, is getting the curriculum to be an A&P updated to the 21st century. Oh my goodness, and this has been an incredible battle to get it done, but it sort of feels like we were actually making some real progress there in terms of promulgating new rules that will allow young men and women to really enjoy the profession of being an aviation technician, as opposed to learning skills that Orville and Wilbur were employing back at Kitty Hawk. So I do think progress has been made there, and I'm a little bit more optimistic on the technician side. But clearly it's a heavy lift.
Chip, I'm going to put you back on the hot seat. So you are the chair of the Next Gen Advisory Committee. And what's your assessment of where FAA is on Next Gen, and how regional airlines, are they able to benefit from modernization?
I think absolutely they are. I think look, the FAA is extremely serious about continuing to move forward with the Next Gen projects that they have, and they're doing a great job and with some good progress. We certainly, as a regional industry, have our own set of challenges relative to our equipment and our equipage, but I always, even as chairman, we sit back and we look at these projects, and it has to make sense from a return on investment perspective. And some of those, some of the yield and dividends have changed, I think, through the pandemic. I think environmentally, all of us as CEOs have a huge responsibility to publish a document that talks about what our carbon emissions are. And from that perspective, I think that the RAA is getting more and more engaged in certain aspects of that. But there's a big return on investment, and the business model is complicated. And part of what I think that's why they put me in as chairman, is to help the regional industry along with equipage, because we have, certainly two different primary fleets. You've got the Bombardier and Mitsubishi products, and you've got the Embraer products, and one is making aircraft and one is not, and the new ones that are coming off the line are equipped largely. And we have an entirely, set of aging fleet that is not. And so from our perspective at SkyWest, we see this very, very clearly. We have both fleets. We're one of the biggest operators of both of those fleets, and we're committed to not just, make sure that we're ordering new aircraft that are equipped, but we're even looking at retrofitting some of our old aircraft because, look, the ROI is there. And I think it's our responsibility as regional carriers and CEOs to figure out how we can take that ROI and make sure the partners recognize it and come up with probably different revenue models or new business models where we can, capture that. We certainly feel like as we have our conversations with our partners that there's some good leeway today finally, and it hasn't been that way for a long time. But if we're really serious about what we're going to do environmentally and what we're going to do from an efficiency and safety standpoint, these technologies are outstanding. I get a sense that the FAA is absolutely committed to it, and we need to just make sure that it's our responsibility to close some very complicated loopholes with us, the FAA, and the relationships we have with our partners to get some progress.
Well said.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm disappointed to see that it doesn't appear that would be part of any infrastructure bill that emerges equipage for the regional industry. We've talked about it, and we had the opportunity to talk to legislators months ago about this as they considered it. There, in my mind anyway, there can't be any more shining example of an efficient and responsible use of capital and technology to reduce the carbon footprint than to stop airplanes flying around and queuing up at our airports. Compare that to the cost and the timeline of building runways and building infrastructure. And it just seems that this would be the simple and best way to move the first step forward. So I don't think we can give up on that. We have to see it. Chip's right. There's great value in it. We intend to have our fleet equipped, and we intend to be best served because we're best equipped. Again, in the general public sense, if there are aircraft that don't get next gen equipage, really making a trade from service from congested airports like New York and Chicago and DC to the heartland of capitals and rural communities in exchange for the 50th daily departure to Orlando. That's not much in the way of incremental service or value from where we sit. So we have to see this become a reality.
On the subject of sustainability, and to my mind, I think I agree with you. I think there's a real miss that Congress declined to provide some funding for addressing mixed equipage, because that's one of the most material things we can do right now to increase our sustainability and bring down the carbon footprint. But the industry overall has set some really aggressive carbon goals regarding carbon neutral growth. And in Europe, and particularly France, taken a different approach, and they've banned domestic short haul on all flights where you can get there by train in less than 2.5 hours. Stateside, we all know it's really important to protect our planet and our, but yet we don't want to ask our small communities to bear the cost of sustainability by losing their air service. What are some of the problems, that aviation needs to solve? And I think we probably just identified one of them, which is streamlining and modernizing the system. But what are some of the ways that regionals can take part or even lead the way on that? Chip, I'm going to start with you.
Well, I think it's interesting because I think if you applied the same rules in the United States as you did France, would still be flying regional airplanes everywhere we were. It wouldn't have any impact because, France and Europe have a completely different structure that they've invested in, primarily, nuclear and other resources that give them some flexibilities. But from our perspective, I think we have to look at new fleets. I think we have to take seriously what we just talked about with how we're flying these airplanes. We are obviously looking at different things with fuel and electronics and electric engines and those types of things. And I think all of us can be honest about it and say it is a long ways off before you're going to take 76 passengers or whatever it is in something that's not powered by grade A jet fuel. So, but the technologies that we can deploy at very busy airports to fly these more efficiently are absolutely real and something that we should take note of, because I was disappointed that we put some other things in the infrastructure bill associated with these things that are not going to be, 10 to 15 years away, but the stuff that could help us today, we didn't get any funding for. So that just means we have to still step up and take responsibility for ways in which we can work with our partners to, to get down the pathway. But we got to be doing this efficiently. We got to talk to manufacturers. We got to get some more efficient aircraft manufactured if we want to stay in the space. That certainly is a very big thing that we need to do as well. And I think I think we need to be probably more aggressive about all of those things.
So that brings up the topic of the OEMs, and there are a lot of OEMs in the room, and they spend a lot of their time trying to predict what you all will do with your business. So let's take a guess at what they might be doing. There's been a lot of, it's no secret, there's been a lot of transactional activity with the manufacturers, but there have been some surprises. But we're hearing ideas on rebranding and redesigning aircraft. Are there focus areas that you think the OEMs will be looking at to meet your needs? Brian, I'll start with you.
Well, again, it's a capital intensive business. We've seen folks enter and exit the business over the last 10 years, trying to bring new products to market, trying to integrate new engine technology to new airframe and wing design. Again, extremely expensive undertaking and not for the faint of heart. We heard this morning from Mark Neely about Embraer's focus on a new generation turboprop. And that's an interesting, it's an interesting opportunity. Clearly, turboprops burn less gas than jet-powered aircraft. The trade-off obviously is speed and big propellers, which Americans seem to hate. So thank you, Mark, for putting them on the back of the airplane as opposed to the wing. I think that's certainly helpful. But does that go far enough? I mean, we've seen geared turbofans have a fairly significant effect on reducing fuel consumption. If we go back in time, we saw uninducted fan motor technology that might have been an interesting, next change of the paradigm for an advanced turboprop product. So that might have been something that would have been interesting to see Embraer look at as part of a new generation prop plane. So aside from that, I think on sustainability and technology, it's getting the current fleet to operate on sustainable aviation fuels and partnering with the government on, making a tax efficient system for sustainable aviation fuels versus carbon offsets successful. We see a lot of interesting emerging technology on the small passenger side, whether they're eVTOLs or battery operated 9-seat aircraft. I think that's really where all the fun action is right now in terms of new technology integrating into commercial airspace. Some really exciting stuff on that. I think that's going to be interesting, and you have to start small in order to build the big. So again, I'm optimistic about some of those inflection points that we'll see over the next decade.
Right. And I think to Brian's point also, I think that manufacturers need to digest data within the United States. I mean, a lot of times we look to China and we look to Asia and see if that's the baseline that we can manufacture fleets with. But I think that there is enough demand in the United States with the current replacement opportunities for fleets, combined with the fact that we talk about on a post-pandemic world, we're going to be flying more to smaller cities and do some different, I think, stuff throughout the United States because people don't want to live in big cities anymore. And that's a real thing. I think that when you take a look at all that data, there's some tremendous opportunity for manufacturers because, again, this is extremely capital intensive. I think most of us are willing to help participate in the right aircraft and the right solutions, but we've got to, like I say, we spend a lot of our time at SkyWest talking to manufacturers about this, and I think all of us have got to be more aggressive about tackling this because if we're still flying the same fleet in 10 years from now, we're going to be in trouble probably.
So the last question, and it's the lightning round, but speaking of 10 years from now, what do we all look like? What does the industry look like? And if that's a predictable question, here's the twist. What do we all need to do right now to make sure that the answer is healthy and thriving and even growing? Dan?
I'm just hoping for a final December schedule at this point.
That was a very very lightning round.
Yeah, no,
You have a November schedule already?
November one already?
yeah.
It's a wholly owned thing.
No, Faye, that's an impossible question to answer. I mean, you think about the dynamic and the change that's been driven over just the last 5 to 6 years, and certainly accelerated with the pandemic. I don't know if anybody here would have the answer. I'd love to have a cup of coffee and talk about it. I do think that we're getting pressure from both ends. Obviously, new technologies found its way to the marketplace in the Bombardier developed A220 now at Airbus, which has found a means to infuse technology onto an aircraft, breakthrough technology that's opened up the marketplace, and that aircraft is having some effect. And then just the same, you mentioned the eVTOL aircraft. I mean, today that looks like air taxi service. Tomorrow, in 10 years, will the technology make that transition to being able to, be aboard a 70,000 plus gross weight aircraft? We certainly hope so. We'd love to see that extends its way into the regional business. If it does, I think it gives us, a portal into the future for the next 50 years. All of us here have the same aspirations of having a carbon neutral footprint and delivering service on par with the biggest carriers in the world using emerging technology. So I would hope that's part of our future in 10 years.
Chip, how about you?
I agree. I think technology, like we talked about, fleets and technology are going to have to play a huge role in where we're going to be even 10 years from now. And I think that the differentiating factors within that technology, you got to have a strong balance sheet to be able to propel those technologies forward. And you also have to have great people that you're taking good care of, and you have complete respect for what their challenges may be in the next 10 years. So I think those 3 things are probably the 3 key things of what we're focused on for the next 10 years while we wait for a December schedule.
Brian, have you gotten your December schedule?
Wait for November.
No.
Same question.
Well, I think past is prologue, right? If we go back 20 years or go back 10 years, just look at the regional airline business, it is consolidated dramatically. We've gone from, 20 years ago, I think we had north of 100 regional airlines in the country. I was running Republic, but back then we were called Chautauqua, and we were the 25th largest regional airline in the country back then. Today, I think the 12th largest regional airline is Cape Air. Congratulations, Linda. So it's shocking to see how the industry has consolidated. I don't think it's done. Honestly, I think the industry 10 years from now could be half the size it is today. More likely will be half or less than the industry is today. We've got 600-ish 50-seat regional jets in the marketplace, single class aircraft that are pretty long in the tooth. I think, over the next 10 years, they will be economically obsolete, and the question remains, what will replace them? So, and will there be pilots to fly them? So I see the industry splitting to where all of a sudden small is beautiful again. So I think the Cape Air space is very intriguing with a lot of potential upside. But that's taking advantage of a regulatory policy issue where Part 135 carriers get to act different than Part 121 carriers. And as long as that's there, I think smart people will figure out a way to trade on that. And it also happens to be where some of the cool advancements in technology are going. So again, I see sort of the industry bifurcating into fewer extremely large scale players and more niche small guys.
More niche small guys.
Okay,
Okay.
let's use a genderless pronoun, regionals.
Very good. Tim.
Well, in the cargo side of things, I see us as probably one of the early users in the regional cargo, early users of this new technology. I agree, you got to start small to grow big. And there's a lot of interesting, innovative technology being developed out there from both power plants and complete airframes. And you look at delivery systems that could work for an Amazon or a FedEx that would really originate at a distribution center and meaningfully move a couple thousand pounds of freight out into a smaller regional hub where you don't have to use an airport, to where you can bypass that system. I think that's going to become a reality. I think that I'm not so, we're seeing the small single package drone delivery. That's all really cute stuff. I think it's very expensive. I know it'll take some kind of traction in the future, but I don't think it's going to be the biggest part of it. I really think the ability to distribute from hub to hub and bypass the system. And then in the case of someone like us flying for FedEx, the design of these new technology electric aircraft that are actually getting to the point they have some reasonable range to them and a payload that's come close to matching a Cessna Caravan. At some point, those are going to be more and more commonplace. I think it's a few years off, but I do think we will be seeing some of that. The other part is, I believe sincerely that the regional carriers the regional cargo carriers will be some of the first ones to fly unmanned aircraft. And that technology is rapidly approaching. Development is continuing along, and I do think that that's going to be a segment. It'll be a long time before it's the major part of it, but for the Cessna size aircraft, I believe it is advancing fairly nicely. So the rules in the airspace system have to be there in place. That's probably the biggest thing that has to be overcome right now. And there's a lot of work looking at it. But in 10 years, I think my side of the industry is going to look quite different.
Well, that's great. This has been a wonderful panel, and we did ask the impossible questions, but you all answered them very well, and lots of excitement on the horizon, but some challenges too. But we'll all tackle them together. So please join me in thanking our panelists for a very nice session. Okay. Well, this was a great panel to have at this time, because next